Welcome to Your Two Cents, the podcast. I'm Alicia Mccarvell.
And I'm Sylvia Beirnes. Your Two Cents, the podcast is proudly made in partnership with credit unions who are just as obsessed with talking about money as we are.
I cannot talk enough about this topic, which is hilarious because I used to dread the D word, which is debt. And it is a topic that a lot of people are afraid to talk about, especially when you're in over your head.
Absolutely. And Danny from credit unions actually makes this the most digestible conversation, which I could never have dreamed of in a million years. It is such an amazing conversation. Our brains exploded so many times. He talks about the good, the bad, and the ugly sides of debt.
I cannot wait for you to listen to this. You're going to learn so much about debt, how to alleviate it, how to move through it, and that a lot of us have it. This is Your Two Cents, the podcast made by Bicoastal in partnership with credit unions. This is one of my now favorite topics to talk about, which is ironic because it used to be something I was so afraid to talk about. I lost my job, I ended up in debt, and it was a really challenging part of my life. And I know that a lot of people are going through something similar. And if I wouldn't have been so afraid to have conversations like this, I probably would have handled it a little bit differently.
For sure. And debt is such a real part of everybody's lives. There's rent, there's bills, there's student loans, there's so many things, and it truly is one of the scariest topics to talk about. And it's really hard to talk about when you're in leaner times as well too, because it's hard to know where to begin when you're in debt and how you get out of it.
We love Danny because we got to meet him via Zoom, and you were so transparent and so generous with the fact that you've been in these experiences, and you're our debt expert today. So, and I think that we all live in that place of, if I experience it, I can't be an expert in it. And I think that that's the opposite. I think when you have experience, it makes you better to talk about it. That's why we talk about money now. So, if you're comfortable, can you share a little bit of your experience with debt?
Yeah, so I grew up in a small town. When I went to university, I had to get student loans. And I'll be honest, like, most of my student loans would probably be more consumer debt. I always joke around that I crammed my 4-year degree into 6 years because I really didn't know what I wanted to do until I got toward the end of my degree. And on top of that, I was, kind of trying to live up to the lifestyle a lot of my friends were having. I had friends that were in co-op programs like engineering, but I wasn't. So when you're trying to go out as much as they do, and you can't afford it, that means you're using student loans, you're working on the side. Our family didn't talk about money, so I didn't really have a grasp of what any of that should look like. I just had my student loans, I had a credit card, I had a Columbia House account, which dates me a lot.
So did I, so you're in good company.
I did not, so you two are old.
Yeah, and it was one of those things too that I had my head in the sand a lot. Like, I didn't pay a lot of attention, so I just assumed I had really bad credit at one point. And then when I realized I wanted to go into the finance industry, and you have to be bonded, you have to be licensed, you actually have to have a credit check, and you have to have a decent credit score, you can't have anything in collections. And going through that process, I knew this would come up, so I was kind of forced to learn more about my credit situation, stop ignoring it. And then getting out of it was one of those things that made me realize, like, this is what I like to do. I liked, initially I was thinking about going to actuarial sciences, but I liked helping people, I liked talking to people. Like listening to people's stories. That was a lot more interesting to me than spending a lot of years in the library and a lot of years like working on life tables and things like that.
Yeah, that's really cool, because when you get out of it yourself and then you go, wait a second, I can help other people do the same thing, and to be now working in that field, it's actually a thing we talk about all the time, which is there's real people behind those jobs, and you think that someone who's ended up in a career of financial services is because you were obsessed with money from a young age, you knew everything about it, you grew up in families that talked about it.
You had
not
a lot
in
of
your
it.
story.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually way more common than the inverse of that. So I love that it was actually what fueled your passion to follow that path in life, which is super cool.
I love that you led with you want to help people and like helping people, because I think that a lot of the fear for me stemmed from being scared that the person on the other line was going to make me feel silly for what I was experiencing and what I was going through, when realistically it's people like you who want to help and help me feel better. And like the peace of mind getting my credit and learning about money has given me is something I wish I could have given myself years ago. We're gonna jump in. We've got a whole bunch. I hope you're prepared for that. We have so many questions, but I want to start with me and use my experience. Like, I lost my job. I didn't know where to go. I had debt. What would you say is the first step for someone in that position?
Honestly, it's just sitting down, taking stock. you can't really understand where your debt is or where your financial situation is until you take stock of what's coming in, what's going out, what debts you owe, what needs to be paid, and what your options are.
Okay.
So you kind of need to have everything really organized. It's really boring. I had a professor, like I always attribute, and I'm sure I've changed his quote so many times having said it, but he always said, if you're good at something that people find difficult or find boring, you'll have a job for life. And that's the thing with money.
Oh, I like that.
It's really hard. Money is a stressful topic. It's still the top 5 reasons people get divorced. It's still the number 1 reason that most people say they're stressed in the first place.
Yeah.
So it is a thing people find difficult, but it is first taking stock without any judgment, just looking at it all and just deciding, okay, I have this much of a deficit every month. What can I do to at least alleviate it? Because a lot of people also make the assumption if you can't cover the deficit while you're out of work, that there's no point in doing any of it. Mm-hmm. But there's a big difference between going $500 or $600 a month in the hole to $1,500 a month in the hole while you're finding a job, because getting back out of that hole a lot easier if you don't dig as much dirt up.
Yeah, and it's really hard, I'm sure, in that moment. You've lost your job. You are literally, all you're thinking about is how do I survive? How do I put food on the table, roof over my head, pay my bills? Sitting down and actually taking that inventory can feel really, really scary because it's the reality of your actual situation. But I think when you face that, I've had those moments in time where you're like, okay, this is the reality of my life. What do I do with it? It just puts it into perspective, and it actually allows you to have that path forward. But being honest with yourself and like looking in the mirror is a really hard thing to do.
I think I built it up so,
Yeah.
you know, you build it up and then you uncover it and you're like, wow, maybe this is more accessible and more doable than I thought it was going to be. And I think with money specifically, I think we create these big bad monsters, whether it's the person on the other line that is answering or our debt and what we're going through ourselves, when realistically it's not always as bad as we think it is. And is there an amount of debt that is too much debt?
So there's no magic number, like a certain multiple of your income or anything like that, because different debts have different servicing ratios. And that's what all debt is landed out on, is a servicing ratio. How much of your income can you borrow against based on the monthly payments?
Okay.
So for instance, if you owe $300,000 or $400,000 on a mortgage, that's not nearly as bad as owing $50,000 on a credit card, even though it's a bigger number, because you get to amortize it over a longer period of time. It's a lower interest rate. So there's no magic number. But what really does matter is how much you can actually service. And I don't mean just, banks, credit unions all have a certain number they use. It's a percentage of your gross income. But we all know, and it only looks at debts and gross income. But we all know that's not really how you live your life. You live your life in after-tax dollars, and in the realities of there could be bills that are just as important as debt. So a bank will lend the same amount of money to 2 people who have the same debt payments and the same income, but if one of them is, a single parent with 2 children in daycare, they have bills that are far beyond, the single person right out of university living in a 1-bedroom apartment.
Yeah.
So they'll get lent the same amount of money, but you also need to know your own situation.
Okay.
The second thing I would say is it's important to also not be afraid before you run into an actual issue with payments to call some of your debtors and see if you can negotiate some better terms or see if there's something they can do. Because at that point, you still have good credit. You've never missed a payment, and now you're being proactive. They're usually much more willing to work with you on restructuring things, because at the end of the day, you have their money and they want it back. So making it easier to give it back to them is actually going to be in all their best interest. And keeping your credit score high is actually good for them as well, because in the future, when you go to buy a house, you're a person who's now a potential customer. So they're actually more willing to help you than most people realize. I'm not saying they're going to just abolish everything, but they could move you to credit cards with lower interest rates. They could term out a loan over a period of time so that it's stretched over a longer period of time to lower your payments while you're getting through a period. And some of them even have forgiveness clauses where they'll let you skip a payment.
Yeah.
So right when you're at the worst point of it, you're waiting for EI to kick in or something, trying to get some of those things in place can be really, really useful.
I honestly never thought about the fact that when you hit those situations, your credit hasn't been damaged yet. So getting in front of it is a way to also protect yourself long term, and that fear of like making that phone call because it feels embarrassing is how your credit starts to get damaged, and then you're kind of in a bigger cycle of all of that. So I literally called the CRA yesterday because I had a question about my taxes, and the woman was so nice to me, and I said, I am actually obsessed with the CRA. And she goes, we're all just people. And I was thinking, I didn't tell her, we were literally in the middle of having these conversations, but I was like, exactly. And if you call and explain your situation, she said to me, this was literally a verbatim conversation I just had yesterday. She said, if you run away from us, then we're really scary. if you call us and tell us what's happening, we just want some of your money. We don't even need all of it right now. We're willing to work with you. And it was just really nice to hear someone say that, obviously in light of these conversations, but it's so true. Running away from something is much scarier than turning around and going, okay, how do we do this? But I didn't think about the credit score piece of it still being intact. And then you can preserve that if you just are able to have those conversations.
Yeah. At Your 2 Cents, we obviously love talking about money. The credit unions do too. There are many things to love about credit unions, but the one most amazing thing is that they love treating their members as people. They know that your finances aren't the same as anyone else's, so they've got banking solutions that are as unique as you are. Credit unions are the proud sponsors of Your 2 Cents, the podcast. The idea that people want to help is a big thing. You feel so alone in your own feelings. You don't realize that other people have experienced those things. And I also don't think we truly grasp how much debt exists for everybody, for businesses, for people who look like they have a lot of money. I think we have created debt to be this bad thing, when I know now that it's not necessarily a bad thing. So could you talk a little bit about good debt, bad debt? Is that a fair term to use, or?
Yeah, I think it's a really fair term, and it's probably better than saying, because not all things that can be good debts, not all mortgages are good debts. If you bought a place that was outside of your price range, I wouldn't say that's really good debt. So it really comes down to, what I would say is, if you can look at the thing you bought with that debt and say, I still see more value in it than what I owe, then it was a good debt.
Okay.
If you think that thing that you purchased is going to last longer than your debt, then that's a better debt than one where it's I can't even tell you what I spent that money on.
Yeah.
So things like your education, buying a home, buying a car so you can get to work, those are better examples of good debt. And then the terms that go with those debt also help a little bit. Did you sign up for anything that's really going to bite you later on? Did you sign up for a car loan with a 20% payment because you had to get this particular used car or something, instead of looking for different financing arrangements? But in general, I would say, as long as you know what it is you got with that debt, it was for something that's actually of tangible value, and it'll last longer than the thing the thing you bought is going to last longer and provide value to you for longer than it's going to take you to pay it off. Those would be examples of good debt. So, if you get heat pumps for your home, it's going to help you with your. I'm in the process of doing that, so it's on my mind. So it's going to lower your power bill, give you some heating. It's going to have value longer than the debt would last. That's a good debt. And then avoiding things having a credit card bill where you literally couldn't tell you one tangible thing that you have on there, and now you're going to be paying it off for a while.
Yeah. Is there a maximum amount of debt you can have?
No, which is
Oh God, that's scary. I did not think that was going to be your answer.
There is a hypothetical maximum, but I mean, every different debt type also has a maximum amount, and then they kind of add together. So I have seen people manage to get themselves more debt than they thought they could handle and actually could handle. And it's because you can do things if you get a lot of debt at the same time, they don't know about each other yet. So sometimes things will get approved really, really quickly.
Oh, right.
Other things is that they base it on what you can service, not necessarily what you can actually afford. So they have their own servicing ratios based on your gross income, but it's not like the amount of debt is capped at that. It's the amount of payment. So sometimes you can be given an amount of debt that eats up all of your free cash flow, but you're only paying the interest. And that puts you in a situation where you really can't get out of it.
Yeah.
Or you're getting out of it's going to be very slow and arduous.
When you use the term service, can you I don't know what that means. Can you break that down?
So servicing just means the amount of your income that goes towards that debt. So if you have $5,000 in a month, usually the maximum total debt service ratio that banks want to lend out is 40%.
Okay.
And that's $5,000 gross income, so you're not clearing it, but they'll take $2,000 after tax in debt payments. So what that $2,000 or that portion of it really is made up of depends. If you're spending, if you take out a 12-month loan, the payments are going to be higher, so that's going to eat up a big chunk of the $2,000 for not that much money. But a mortgage is going to allow you to stretch it out over 25 years.
Right.
And all of a sudden you can have a very large number that you can service on that $2,000.
Gotcha. So it's really that ability to actually pay based on the money that you are taking into your bank account after taxes and all. Well, they base it on gross. But you should, as a consumer,
It's almost set up for failure.
Yeah, kind
of. Off of that. Almost the concept is, especially if they don't know about each other, or you're what they're giving you. I never really thought about that.
Me neither.
I do remember my first credit card, and that's something that I want to talk about, because you talked about the difference between, obviously a home, a mortgage, and a credit card debt, the difference between the two. I got my first credit card straight out of high school, 18. I was the oldest of my grade, 18. And I remember how much my paychecks were every 2 weeks, but I got a credit card for $1,000. And I know now, looking back at that was an unreasonable amount for me to have at that time. And I did a great job of paying off my debt on it and paying my monthly payments, and then it was $2,500, and then it was $5,000, and then it was $10,000, and I put myself into a point where it was just an unreasonable amount for me to have access to. And hypothetically, you've got that 21-year-old that has that credit card debt. How do you go about credit card debt? Like, what would be your biggest piece of advice?
Well, my first step would be to call the credit card company and immediately switch to whatever the lowest rate card is. Almost every company has a card that's at about half the interest rate. Typically they're at 19.99, but you can usually negotiate down to 10, 11.
Okay.
It foregoes getting any points or anything on your credit card, but once you're starting to carry a balance, points are meaningless.
Okay.
They're typically valued at around 1% of what you spend a year, but if your credit card's maxed out, you're not going to put much back on it.
I didn't
And
think about
the interest you're paying is way more than you're getting back in points. Okay. So getting that interest rate lower helps first. So because if your minimum payment was 2.1% of the balance at 19.99%, that's almost just interest. But get it down to 10, and about half of it now is going towards taking your balance down, and it becomes a bit of a snowball. Second thing I would do is, so if people have things spread out amongst a lot of credit cards, there's two strategies. And one is like purely numbers based, and it can work for some people, but it takes a little bit more discipline, and that is trying to find and paying as much as you can towards the highest interest debt first.
Okay.
And then when you get that one paid off, move to the second highest, move to the third highest, and so on. If the rates are kind of similar, the one that actually works better for most people in real life isn't actually the most efficient, but what it is, it's more motivating, and it's called a snowball. And it's you take the lowest balance debt and you eliminate it, because eliminating a debt gives you kind of this dopamine hit, and it makes you want to do it more.
Oh.
And then you do it with the next lowest. And not only that, it makes your life simpler, because if you had 5 cards and you got rid of the lowest one really, really quickly, you're down to 4. You only have 4 payments to make. And it makes it a lot easier. And the way you do that is, rather than paying a little bit extra on every card, you pay the minimum on everything and the maximum on the one you're trying to eliminate. So you target one, you focus on, this is my goal, just get rid of this one, break it into a bite-sized kind of thing, instead of thinking it as, I have to eliminate these 5 cards. I have to keep these 5 cards from getting mad at me, and I have to get rid of that one.
Okay. Go to the, I love that. This is why we're talking to you. I literally have learned 50 things already, and I hate math, but everything that you're talking about actually makes so much sense to me. I think the big thing too is, like, if you have no idea where to start, I think the first thing is, like, call somebody. I think it's like, pick up the phone and call, whether it's your credit card or your credit union or whoever. You can actually just say, like, I actually don't know the answer to this. Where do I start? That can feel really scary too, because I don't even think I would think to call my credit card first. Wow. So for the people that aren't listening to this, it's like, just ask anybody anything. But I think calling the credit card first, I didn't even think about negotiating for a lower rate.
I'm so stuck in, like, point blindness.
Yes,
100%.
me too.
Like, oh, if
I
I'm
love a
points,
point.
but I never once thought of that. And I mean, I'm in a different standpoint now, but I definitely would have been masked by but then I can't collect points. But you're right, if you're not spending money on a maxed out card, then you're not collecting any points, which,
makes total
marketing.
sense.
Yeah, points are a bit of a trap to begin with. So I noticed, I used to, and like, this is one of those things, I thought I was pretty good with money at this point. And I was putting everything on a credit card, and because I paid it off every month and I wasn't paying any interest, I was tricking myself into thinking the credit card was only having a positive effect. So what I did was, I was doing more and more research. Like, my background is actually math, and it's funny enough, getting in this industry, I was so focused on giving people the correct answer, like the most mathematically correct, that it wasn't until my career kind of took off more when I realized, talking to people on a behavioral level, like realizing people have these biases that you need to play into, and you shouldn't try to veer people away from them so much as kind of go towards their strong biases that are positive. Like, if you like paying off debt and that gives you more motivation than saving, you should do more debt repayment. So one of the things with points that I realized when I started, I was paying off my credit card every single month. I wasn't paying any interest, and that tricks you into thinking you're just getting something for free. But what I realized when I switched to not using my credit card for everything, so I started using my credit card for things that I didn't have any emotional attachment to, like filling up the car with gas, paying my insurance bills. But then for fun money, like groceries and variable expenses, I started using a prepaid credit card. My spending went down 8% without even thinking about it. I wasn't trying to spend less, but because you're forced to think about, I have $500 left on this card for groceries for next week, it made me spend a little bit less, and that 8% is worth more than the 1% I was getting in cash back.
Danny deserves a raise. Danny deserves a raise.
This is an audio format. We are also, you can watch this as a video. And if you are, you will see our jaws drop. But if you're not watching, we both were just like, I think you've silenced us both for the first time in our lives.
We were just talking about how I know I will make do with what I have.
Yeah.
But I don't ever make myself make do. And having a prepaid credit card would do that. Like, here's the X amount of dollars that you have to spend at this country festival. Don't go over it. Like, I feel like,
Yeah.
okay.
I love that.
All right, Danny.
You could even test it out for something like a trip. Like, do you put a prepaid credit card together for a trip so you know you're spending within your budget? Like, that could be a cool way to like set a budget for yourself, put it on a prepaid credit card, and then that's your.
Absolutely, and then
That's so
you know,
cool.
because it's prepaid, you're not usually paying a fee or anything
Yeah.
for it, so you could go get one in the currency that you're actually traveling for. So then it's easier to, you don't get that shock when you get home.
Right.
The difference in the currency, because if you're spending everything in pounds and you're Canadian, you're probably not doing the math because you're on vacation. And you get home and see how much it is in Canadian dollars, and with the exchange rate, you're like, oh.
That's terrible.
My budget.
I'm going to try this. I think it's a
know.
really cool way to like think about budgeting because budgeting is such an important piece of it too. Then going,
But
am I
almost like
sticking to a
forced
budget?
budgeting.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I know how much money I have in my bank account, but here's the card that you're allowed to use.
Oh, I love that.
Cash. And I find I do that with cash, which is that's
Same.
usually like I'll take cash out and be like, that's my spending habits, or I'll set like amounts on that I can take out. Like I'm fine, but yeah.
But when I
prepaid
have
card, love
cash
that.
in my wallet, I treat it like
Girl
it
math,
is.
$0.
It's $0. No, but I mean, I'm so more precious about it. Like
Oh,
handing
yeah.
over a bill to somebody is like, I'm watching
When you have
that
to
$20
count it,
more than $20 on my credit card, 100%.
Yeah.
Absolutely. When you have cash, and like what I would say is find what works for you. Like
Yeah.
there's no one size fits all. That's the other thing I learned. Like there's the best mathematical solution, but every individual person has different ways they think about things, different things that work for them. And you only have so much willpower.
Right.
It's a finite resource. So you don't want to waste it. So set your system up based on what works for you.
Cool.
So if cash works, use cash. I was using cash, and I found the prepaid cards a little bit easier because I have this habit of cash is already spent because it's out of my account.
Right.
But one thing it helps me with is like you know how much you have in your wallet, and you know how much stuff is on, say, a menu.
Yeah.
It makes you think about it a little bit more.
Yeah.
Credit cards are really well designed to make you not think about
it.
because you know it's going to work when you tap
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
put it in the machine.
Yeah.
But then you have to face the reality later of how much you actually spend.
One of my favorite things about credit unions is that they have people working there who aren't afraid to admit that they're actually real people who have real relationships with money.
Obviously, it comes from a place of knowledge, and you're gonna hear in part 2 genuinely how knowledgeable Danny is on this topic. But he made it so digestible, so easy to learn from him, but also just he comes from a place of like relationships and personalization, and yeah, it was so comfortable for me. Honestly, healing in a sense.
Same with me, and I loved when he was breaking down like good and bad debt and explaining in depth what both of those things were. I knew there was good debt, I think, but that word is always so bad and negative that hearing that there's good debt was pretty amazing.
Yeah, we could have talked to him forever.
Absolutely.
But lucky for you, there is a part 2, so make sure you come back for that.
This is Your 2 Cents, the podcast, proudly made in partnership with iHeartRadio and credit unions and made by Bicoastal.